The city never truly slept, but for Emma, the nights felt endless. The streets of Chicago were wet from an earlier rain, the pavement slick and shining beneath the dull glow of flickering streetlights. A bitter wind cut through the alleyways, howling between buildings like a cruel reminder of how unforgiving the world could be. Emma pulled her tattered coat tighter around her thin frame, but it did little to keep the cold at bay. Her fingers, numb and stiff, trembled as she tucked them into her sleeves. She had been homeless for 6 months now, 6 months of sleepless nights, empty stomachs, and the crushing weight of invisibility. Once she had a job, a small apartment, a life that, while far from perfect, had at least been her own. But losing her job had set off a chain reaction. Late rent, eviction, rejection after rejection, until she had nowhere left to go. People rarely looked at her anymore. She had become just another nameless figure blending into the background of the city, a shadow on the sidewalk. Her stomach clenched painfully, a hollow ache that had become all too familiar. She swallowed hard, trying to ignore the dizziness that came with hunger. She hadn't eaten since the morning before. Reaching into her frayed backpack, she pulled out the last bit of food she had. A stale sandwich, the bread dry and crumbling at the edges. It wasn't much, but it was something. She needed this meal. With slow, deliberate movements, she unwrapped the sandwich, her hands shaking from both the cold and the deep exhaustion settling into her bones. She found a spot near a dimly lit alleyway, hoping for at least a few moments of quiet before the city pushed her aside once more. Just as she lifted the sandwich to her lips, she sensed something, a presence nearby. She froze. In the shadows a few feet away, a pair of eyes watched her. A dog. Thin and ragged, the stray stood just at the edge of the alley, its body hunched against the cold. Its ribs jutted out beneath a dirty coat of fur, and its tail hung low, lifeless, defeated. But its eyes, deep brown and filled with something Emma recognized all too well, were locked onto her sandwich. She hesitated. This was her food, the only thing keeping her from another night of crippling hunger. Yet, as she looked into the dog's eyes, she saw something that made her chest tighten. Herself, alone, hungry, forgotten by the world. Emma sighed, her breath curling into the cold air. She couldn't just ignore him. Slowly she tore the sandwich in half. "Here," she murmured, extending a piece toward him. "It's not much, but it's all I've got." The dog hesitated. His nose twitched, sniffing the air, but his body remained tense, as if he didn't believe kindness could be real. Emma stayed still, waiting. Finally, with slow, cautious steps, the dog crept forward. He sniffed at the food in her outstretched hand, then, gently, almost reverently, took the piece from her fingers. The sound of him eating was quiet, but in the stillness of the alley, it felt almost sacred. Emma watched him, something warm flickering in her chest despite the cold. "You look like a fighter," she said softly. "Like a little bear." The dog's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, and as he swallowed the last bite, he did something that surprised her. His tail, thin, barely noticeable, gave the smallest wag. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time in months, she didn't feel so alone. The dog, now bare, hesitated only a moment longer before curling up beside her on the pavement. She pulled her coat around them both, and for the first time in a long, long time, Emma felt something close to warmth. Maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible after all. Emma woke to the sensation of warmth pressed against her side. For a moment, in the hazy space between sleep and waking, she forgot where she was. The world was quiet, the city not yet fully awake. Then, as she opened her eyes, the familiar ache of hunger and the rough pavement beneath her reminded her of reality. But something was different. Bear, curled up beside her, his thin body rose and fell with each steady breath. His head rested against her leg, his matted fur brushing against the fabric of her coat. He hadn't left. He hadn't disappeared into the night like everything else in her life had. For the first time in months, Emma woke up feeling a little less alone. She stretched, her muscles stiff from the cold, and Bear lifted his head, blinking at her with sleepy eyes. His tail gave a small wag, and Emma couldn't help but smile. "Morning, Bear," she murmured. He yawned in response. Emma rummaged through her backpack, searching for anything she could share with him. Her fingers closed around an old granola bar, half crushed but still edible. She broke off a piece and held it out. "Here, buddy." "You eat first." Bear sniffed it before licking her fingers, then carefully taking the food from her hand. She chuckled. "Guess that means we're friends now, huh?" Bear gave another wag of his tail, and something in Emma's chest warmed. The rest of the morning was spent walking the city streets. Emma searched for scraps, checking the usual spots where she sometimes found half-eaten food or discarded bottles she could exchange for a few cents. She prioritized Bear, making sure he ate before she did. As they wandered, she found herself talking to him. She told him about her life before this, about the job she lost, about the apartment she had once called home. She told him about her childhood, about how she used to love drawing but hadn't picked up a pencil in years. She told him about the dreams she had almost forgotten, that one day, maybe, she could have a life again. Bear listened. He didn't judge, didn't pity her, didn't turn away. He simply walked beside her, his ears flicking when she spoke, his eyes filled with an understanding she hadn't expected. Emma hadn't realized how much she had missed talking to someone. By midday, Emma and Bear found themselves near a small coffee shop. The scent of freshly baked pastries filled the air, making her stomach twist with hunger. She sat near the entrance, hoping to rest for a while before moving on. Bear curled up at her feet, his head resting on his paws. People walked past, some stealing quick glances, but most pretending not to see her. Then, trouble. The store owner stepped outside, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a scowl carved deep into his face. The moment he saw her, his expression darkened. "Hey, you can't sit here," he barked. "You're scaring off my customers." Emma's cheeks burned. She wasn't doing anything, just existing. "I wasn't asking for anything," she muttered, already reaching for her bag. "I don't care. Move along before I call the cops." She bit the inside of her cheek, forcing herself to stay silent. Arguing never helped. It never changed anything. But before she could stand, a group of teenagers walked by, smirking when they spotted her. "Look at this," one of them sneered. "A little street rat and her flea-ridden dog." Another one kicked an empty soda can, sending it rolling toward them. It clattered against the pavement, stopping inches from Bear's nose. Bear's head snapped up, his ears pinned back, and a deep growl rumbled from his throat. Emma's breath caught. Bear stood, stepping in front of her, his body tense and protective. He didn't bark, didn't lunge, but his posture alone was enough to make the teenagers take a step back. "Whoa," one of them muttered. "That thing looks like it'll bite." "Whatever," another scoffed. "Not worth it." They walked away, laughing, but Emma barely heard them. Her eyes were locked on Bear, on the way he had instinctively defended her. No one had ever done that before. She reached out, running a hand gently over his head. He looked up at her, his tail wagging just slightly, as if to ask, "Are you okay?" Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. "Thanks, Bear," she whispered, and in that moment she realized he wasn't just a stray dog anymore. He was hers. As the afternoon faded into evening, Emma and Bear wandered the streets again, searching for anything that could get them through the night. She was exhausted. The encounter at the coffee shop had left her drained, and the cold was starting to creep back into her bones. Then, fate intervened. An elderly man, Mr. Thompson, walked past them carrying a heavy bag of groceries. He moved slowly, his frail frame struggling under the weight. Then, the bag tore. A carton of eggs shattered against the sidewalk. A loaf of bread tumbled onto the pavement. Apples rolled in different directions. Emma didn't hesitate. She rushed forward, kneeling to gather the fallen items before they could be ruined. Bear, surprisingly, helped too. He nudged an apple toward the man with his nose, his tail wagging slightly. Mr. Thompson chuckled. "Well, aren't you a smart one?" He turned to Emma, his expression soft with gratitude. "Thank you, miss. Not many people stop to help these days." Emma shrugged. "It's nothing." The man studied her for a moment, really looked at her, at the way her coat was too thin for the weather, at the exhaustion in her eyes, at the dog by her side who clearly wasn't just a stray anymore. After a pause, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "Here," he said, "take this. Get yourself and your pup something warm to eat." Emma hesitated. She hadn't done this for money, but she also hadn't eaten all day. She swallowed her pride and accepted it. "Thank you." The man smiled warmly before heading on his way. Emma stared at the money in her hand. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a choice. She walked into the nearest convenience store and bought a small can of dog food. When she returned to Bear and poured the food onto a makeshift dish, he sniffed it once before devouring it happily. Emma watched him, and then, for the first time in weeks, she smiled. It was just a small moment, a fleeting bit of warmth in a life that had been so cold. But in that moment, she felt something shift, something deep, something like hope. The city never slept, but at this hour, long past midnight, when even the busiest streets were nearly empty, it felt eerily still. Emma lay curled up in the corner of an alley, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The cold seeped through the fabric, but she had learned to endure it. At least tonight, she had Bear beside her, his body pressed close, sharing what little warmth they had. Her eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion pulling at her, lulling her into the fragile space between wakefulness and sleep. Then Bear jolted awake. A low, threatening growl rumbled from his throat. Emma stirred, disoriented. "Bear?" she murmured, rubbing her eyes. Before she could fully register what was happening, Bear sprang to his feet, his ears pinned back, his teeth bared. He barked, loud, sharp, urgent. Emma's heart pounded. She sat up just in time to see a man struggling with a woman just a few feet away. The woman was dressed well, mid-40s, wearing a business coat and heels, clearly someone who didn't belong in this part of the city at this hour. The man, a shadowy figure in dark clothes, was yanking at her purse, trying to rip it from her grasp. The woman gasped, stumbling back. "Let go of me!" Emma froze. She had seen things like this before, had learned to stay quiet, to stay invisible. But Bear didn't hesitate. With a sudden burst of movement, Bear charged at the man, snarling. The thief barely had time to react before Bear lunged, sinking his teeth into the fabric of his sleeve. "Get off, you stupid mutt!" the man yelped, shaking his arm violently. But Bear held on. The woman, eyes wide with shock, stumbled backward, clutching onto her purse as the thief struggled against Bear's grip. Then, panicked, the man ripped his arm free and bolted into the night, disappearing around the corner. Emma's breath caught. The woman, still trembling, clutched her purse to her chest. Her hands shook as she stared at Bear, then at Emma, who was just as stunned as she was. "Oh my God!" the woman breathed. "That dog, he saved me." Emma looked down at Bear, who was panting, his tail wagging slightly as if proud of himself. The woman took a deep breath, composing herself before turning to Emma. "Is he yours?" she asked. Emma hesitated. She wanted to say yes, but the truth was more complicated. "I guess he is now." The woman studied her, really looked at her, and for the first time, Emma felt seen. Not as a homeless girl, not as someone people walked past without a second glance, but as a person. The woman extended her hand. "I'm Mrs. Collins." Emma hesitated, then shook it. "Emma." Mrs. Collins glanced at Bear, then back at Emma. "Your dog is incredible, and so are you." Emma blinked. "Me?" "You didn't run," Mrs. Collins said. "Most people would have looked the other way, but you and your dog, you stepped in." Emma wasn't sure what to say to that. Mrs. Collins seemed to think for a moment before she asked, "Do you have a place to stay?" Emma stiffened. She wasn't sure if she should lie, but before she could say anything, Mrs. Collins spoke again. "I own a small pet store." "Well, it's a pet store and cafe combined," she said. "I could use an extra pair of hands. It's nothing glamorous, but it's honest work, and it pays enough for you to get back on your feet." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had spent months being ignored, rejected, treated like she didn't exist, and now? This? She wanted to believe it was real, but part of her was terrified. "What's the catch?" she asked cautiously. Mrs. Collins smiled. "No catch, just someone willing to take a chance on you." Emma glanced at Bear. She thought about that first night, when she had shared her last meal with him. She thought about how, since then, he had never left her side. And now, because of him, because of that one small act of kindness, her entire life might be about to change. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long, long time, she said, "Okay." Emma stood behind the counter of Collins' Pet and Cafe, carefully arranging a display of dog treats near the register. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the light aroma of pet food, creating a warmth that made the little shop feel like home. She never thought she'd use that word again. It had been 3 months since the night Bear saved Mrs. Collins, 3 months since she had been given a second chance. Now, Emma had a steady job, a paycheck, and a place to stay. It wasn't much, just a small rented room in a shared apartment, but it had a bed, a lock on the door, and a roof that didn't leak when it rained. And most importantly, Bear was with her. He had quickly become the unofficial mascot of the store, greeting customers with his wagging tail and soulful brown eyes. Children adored him, slipping him treats when they thought no one was watching. Regulars asked about him by name, stopping by just to give him a scratch behind the ears. Bear was safe, fed, and loved. And so was Emma. For the first time in a long time, she felt like a person again. She had even started thinking about the future, getting a proper ID, maybe even taking some classes. The thought both excited and terrified her, but for now she was just grateful. And then, the past walked through the door. The bell above the shop door chimed, signaling a new customer. Emma barely looked up from the counter, still focused on organizing supplies. "Welcome in," she called out automatically. But then, a voice she hadn't heard in over a year cut through the air. "Emma?" She froze. Her heart stopped. Slowly she turned. A man stood just inside the doorway, his eyes wide with disbelief, his face lined with exhaustion and grief. His clothes were neat but slightly wrinkled, as if he hadn't slept well in weeks. Emma's breath hitched. Her father. He looked at her like he wasn't sure she was real, like he had spent months searching for her, but never actually expected to find her. "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for so long." Emma's throat tightened. She had imagined this moment before, so many times. She had pictured him finding her, had thought about all the things she would say. Would she be angry? Would she turn away? Would she pretend she didn't care? But standing here now, face to face with the man who had once been her only family, all she could feel was an overwhelming wave of relief. Her father took a shaky step closer, his eyes filled with regret. I didn't know how bad things had gotten. I should have helped you. I should have been there." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. She thought about all the nights she had spent alone, cold and hungry, convinced no one in the world cared. But she wasn't alone anymore. She looked down at Bear, who was sitting at her feet, his tail wagging gently, always by her side, always watching over her. And just like that, she knew it wasn't too late. Her father's voice cracked. "Can we start over?" Emma exhaled shakily. And then she stepped forward and embraced him. Her father held on to her like he was afraid to let go. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from healing. Months passed. Emma still worked at the pet store, but now she had bigger dreams. She had a stable life, a support system, and a plan. She had a family again, one she was slowly rebuilding, one day at a time. And through it all, Bear remained by her side. One evening, after a long shift, Emma curled up on her small bed, Bear lying beside her. She ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. She thought back to that first night in the alley, when she had given him half of her last meal, how she had thought she was saving him. But in the end, she smiled softly, whispering into the quiet, "I saved you, but you saved me first." Bear let out a small, content sigh, his tail thumping against the bed. Outside, the city continued to hum with life, but for Emma, for the first time in years, everything felt exactly as it should be. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change a life forever. Emma thought she was saving Bear when she shared her last meal, but in the end, Bear saved her too. Their story is a beautiful reminder that love, loyalty, and second chances can come in the most unexpected ways. From surviving on the streets to finding family, both Emma and Bear prove that hope is never truly lost. It just waits for the right moment to shine. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And most importantly, subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories for more heartwarming tales of love, resilience, and the incredible bond between humans and animals. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story, because every paw print leaves a mark on the heart. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story.